Well, hello there. I cannot be with you in person, so I can be with you through electronic means. I know you're heartbroken, but we'll make it through somehow. I long to see your smiling faces once again on Wednesday. Anyway, this video has to do with argument, persuasive writing. It's often called rhetorical argument as opposed to the kind that you duke it out behind the schoolhouse. This is rhetorical argument, and it's called the art of persuasion. It's an overview. So let's begin. Okay, if you're going to do argument writing, well, you've tried to persuade your best friends, significant others to do something in particular, maybe the particular movie you want to go to, or you want to go to dinner at a particular place, or maybe you want to go shopping at a particular store because your store's got better stuff than their store, or something like that. You've also tried to persuade your parents, I'm sure, that it's that concert that's going on. I really need to go. My friends are going. The party. I should be able to stay out a lot later. Blah blah blah. Okay. Um, and sometimes you've had success, sometimes you haven't. Okay. But do you realize that in trying to convince your friends or your significant others or your parents, you're really practicing a similar strategy to the art of persuasion? Okay. Um, Writing a persuasive essay is not vastly different from trying to make a logical persuasive argument with, say, your parents or something along those lines. Now, what this course will endeavor to teach you, and what these particular modules will endeavor to teach you, is how to make a logical, rational, very precise argument emphatically with power. And that's the point. To be able to persuade people, whatever your audience happens to be, to understanding your viewpoint. Not necessarily automatically agreeing with it, but at least seeing it. And if they leave the room going, let me think about that, you've achieved your goal. So anytime you take a stand on something, you are persuading, you're advocating for something. Any previous essay that you might have written, comparison or cause and effect, or even a reflective essay, you could be arguing something. If you are writing a letter of recommendation or even a letter of admissions to a university or for a job or something, you're practicing the art of persuasion. So when discussing the issues with your friends, your coworkers, your family, um, you could very well be using any one of these persuasive strategies. And while you may not be able to convince others of your viewpoint, you should be able to express your beliefs logically, coherently, and get others to see your viewpoint, at least to seriously consider what you're presenting. So let's take a look. Furthermore, by the way, an effective argument relies on audience analysis. You need to know your audience. Remember, that was one of the points we made. You need to know your audience if you are going to be able to argue effectively. It requires sound logical reasoning, strong evidence, precisely worded sentences. No more of these conversational sentences or just, I got a couple of run-ons, not a big deal. Nope, they've got to be precise. You cannot take the chance that your reader is going to misunderstand because you're trying to convince them. Okay, so let's take a look. Remember from one of the earlier modules, the various aspects. See if I can do this without jumping ahead. The various elements of writing: purpose. Why am I writing this? What do I want to assert? Is my topic too broad? Is it too narrow? Am I being somewhat ambiguous or confusing? Is my topic debatable? That's important because there's some things that really aren't debatable. So why are you trying to argue it? And can I find evidence to back it up? That's important because if you can't find support, you really can't make a plausible argument. Audience is important. Who am I writing to? To convince your readers, you have to understand them. So you need to understand your audience. You need to present your arguments, your examples, your evidence that the audience will understand. I did it again. As you sometimes see, when I'll say something, I get the deer in the headlights look because, okay, I misunderstood my audience. And keep in mind this one too. Your audience that you're trying to persuade is an audience that does not agree with you. Sometimes we call that a hostile audience. If you were trying to persuade somebody who agreed with you, what's the point? They agree with you. So the audience either doesn't agree or they haven't made up their mind yet. So it's a very different audience from any other type of writing you might do. So keep that in mind. Okay, content. What's your main point or position? That's called the claim. Okay, this is your opinion that you're going to try to prove to the reader. For example, and here's an example here, community college should be free to all students who maintain at least a C average in all courses. And the second one here is just another one. It's a claim. I'm making a claim. Okay, now I'm going to try to back that claim up, obviously, with evidence. Okay, another part you have to keep in mind is your claim has to be something you can prove or explain, not just a statement of fact, and that's called a value judgment. For example, this first statement here is fact. George Washington was the first president. There's nothing to prove there. This one, however, okay, requires a evidence, proof. Was he the best president? Was he the worst president? Was he somewhere in between? You've expressed a value judgment with just that word best. Okay? Now you can argue or explain it or debate it or prove it. Then look at your subpoints. These are called the reasons for the argument. Having a topic sentence or a thesis statement isn't enough. You need various parts of that. Remember, we always talk about subpoints that relate back to the topic sentence or thesis. For example, if I wanted to try to prove that, I might use these three things. Okay, George Washington helped to unite a fragmented nation. He paved the way for future presidents, or he had faith in America, etc. Now, whether you agree with that or not, if I were trying to prove it, I would have to point out evidence to prove that, and then you would decide whether you agreed with my evidence, whether you thought it was reasonable or plausible, or whether you said, nah, okay? But that's the point. That's the reasons for your argument, the subpoints. Now, what evidence am I going to use? You made your claim, you have your value judgment, you have your subpoints or your reasons, but now you've got to have evidence, okay? Well, that's where you get into research, and we're going to be doing some of that next week. Not this coming, but next week. You're looking for credible, reliable sources to help you prove your points. And this can be facts. Facts are great, but if you have enough facts, just as in George Washington was the first president, you don't need to prove it. So probably you're not going to have enough facts if it's a debatable issue. Statistics are good, but watch out for statistics. Who's providing those statistics? If I have a drug company providing statistics of the success of their latest medicine, I probably are going to want a second opinion. Also, criteria is important. Did you know that the Labor Department looks at the people unemployed in several different ways? If you work an hour out of the week, you're no longer unemployed. You can't pay your car loan. You certainly can't buy anything more than a Happy Meal at McDonald's, but you're not unemployed. Furthermore, if you drop off the rolls, you're not counted. If you've dropped off the unemployment rolls, I'd say you've been unemployed for a while. But again, look at the criteria. Expert testimony is good. Don't be deceived. All those celebrities that are endorsing various products, if they are not the experts, it doesn't matter how famous they are. Studies are good. What kind of studies? Who did the studies? How many people were involved? Same thing with polls. Okay, how many people were involved? If you poll 400 people at 400 students at Prince George's Community College as to the success of their courses, you may or may not get a good indication, especially if they're all in the same department. You want to poll, I mean, we've got, I think 20,000 students, 40,000 total in the entire college. You're going to have to poll quite a few students in quite a few different areas to get a reasonable understanding. So these are some things you need to consider. Now, an effective argument must have a claim, one or more reasons. I suggest about 3 or 4. One is usually not good enough. And evidence or support for each of those reasons. And these are some examples of various sentences in a particular paragraph or essay that could basically demonstrate what I'm talking about here. So we've got all this together. Now let's see where we go from here. Okay, I think I've given you enough time to read that. Let's take a look here at another aspect, rebuttal. Okay, if you're familiar with debate, you're familiar with rebuttal. Okay, to make your argument complete and convincing, you have to acknowledge other viewpoints. Think pathos. Remember, we talked about the audience, relating to the audience, to identify your audience. Look at such aspects as common goals, beliefs, expectations, to approach the other side and bolster your argument. For example, if you're arguing one side or the other concerning sex education, you might preface your argument with a common acknowledgement that, quote, We both want our children to grow up to be responsible, caring, ethical adults, right? Then you can go make your argument, because of course the audience is going to agree with that, especially if they have kids. They're going to say, sure, now I've kind of established a camaraderie here. Now I can show that I have the same ideas that you do. I have the same understanding, the same goals and desires, but what I'm proposing is going to work better than perhaps what you had before or what's currently going on. So that's one way to rebut. Okay, and keep this in mind too. Okay, if you ignore opposing arguments, you don't even mention that there's an opposing side, or any of the arguments that the other side would have, you can undermine your own I'll say that again. You can undermine your own credibility, because your readers might assume that you are not honest about your claim, or that your claim cannot really stand up to scrutiny. Okay, so that's important to at least acknowledge. Yes, I acknowledge that there are other viewpoints. Now, there may be a lot of them, so you may have to pick the most common one, or you may not be sure. So you may have to, I hate to use the word assume, but you may have to at least go with something that makes sense to acknowledge it. But by all means, acknowledge the other viewpoint, and if you can, rebut it. It makes your argument stronger. And by the way, I mentioned this here. Letter from Birmingham Jail by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King is one of the best classic rebuttal arguments. And of course, it would be helpful if I spelled argument right. But it is an excellent, excellent rebuttal argument, one of the absolute best I have ever read. Okay, so one of the last things to keep in mind, tone and integrity. Ask yourself, how will I ensure the integrity of my argument? Avoid false logic. These are called logical fallacies. We've introduced some of those into the class. And maintain a reasonable, civil, persuasive, but not argumentative tone. Now, how am I going to have an argument without being argumentative? Well, again, rhetorical argument does not mean you're shouting at each other. It means you're trying to persuade them. You're debating. So you want to keep it civil. And that's very crucial in an argument. Because the minute you start getting uncivil, the other person who already doesn't agree with you, you basically tell you exactly where to go with their, they'll tell you you're number one with their middle finger, and they'll leave. So you don't want to do that, okay? So tone is very important. Integrity is very important, okay? Now, there are numerous temptations that writers face to, for instance, omit certain details, or not include certain information. That is not a good argument. That's not arguing with integrity. First of all, represent the information fairly and accurately. If you find something that doesn't agree with your viewpoint, okay, start to look into it. Find out why it doesn't agree. Is the information credible? Is it unreliable? Is it too old? Does it pertain to an area that you're not really discussing? What's going on with this information? Okay, if the information cannot be refuted by you, if it's true, if it's credible, if it's reliable, okay, maybe you need to alter your position a little bit. Okay, doesn't mean you throw it away, but maybe your position needs to be altered. But investigate it, because you may find, oh no, it doesn't pertain to what I'm talking about, and then it's not crucial to what you're saying. But don't just disregard it. That's being unfair, inaccurate, and basically that's not arguing with integrity. Secondly, avoid logical fallacies. Okay, those are the bits of false logic, the bandwagon appeal. Everybody says it must be okay. Overgeneralizing, the slippery slope. If we don't do it this way, we're all going to die, kind of thing. There's a lot of those out there. Arguing with, as I said, celebrities arguing their position. I'm an expert because I'm a celebrity. No, avoid those kinds of things. Make sure your logic is true. Make sure your logic makes sense. And the last thing here, maintain a reasonable tone. Keep your energy and your enthusiasm, but be reasonable. You're talking to fellow human beings. So continue to be civil. Yes, you might want to call them out and say they're idiots, but keep this in mind, okay? You may have heard the expression, never argue with a pig. It's a waste of time and it annoys the pig. If you really thought your people, that your audience were a bunch of idiots, why are you wasting your time? Why are you arguing with them to begin with? But you're arguing because you believe they'll understand your viewpoint. Therefore, They're as intelligent as you, they're as reasonable as you, and you need to argue that way. That's called arguing with integrity and civility. And that makes for a good argument. And trust me, a reasonable reader is going to hear that in your argument. They're going to understand that. They're going to respect you for it. And that just might get them to pay a little bit more attention to your argument. Okay? A couple of quick examples. If you're arguing from a pro-life perspective, for instance, avoid calling the other side baby killers. That's really going to turn them off, okay? If you're arguing from a pro-choice, avoid calling the other side bigoted women haters, okay? Either way, watch your wording, watch your language. Be very careful. If there's a word that can be taken two ways, either don't use it or make it very clear which way you're going to use it, okay? Don't give the other side a chance to think you're insulting them or that you're demeaning them or you're being uncivil, okay? Because it's very, very important. And finally, maintain, as I said, a reasonable tone. Never condescend. Treat the audience as your equals. Present your argument with confidence, authority, and understanding. And if you do that, your audience, well, that's not quite the audience I had in mind. Let's try another audience, although they might like it too. Your audience will applaud your effort. Your argument will be successful. They may not agree with you, as I said before, but at least you've given them something to think about, and they'll walk away with a different understanding and very possibly pondering just what you've said. That's a good argument. So, I hope you understood what I said. If not, that's what Rewind is for. And again, I will see you on Wednesday. Don't forget to take the quiz. I will grade it. You will get some points for that. Don't forget to do the exercises in Module 13, as well as reading the other text. Very, very important. And I will be looking forward to seeing you on Wednesday. So I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. Remember, just a couple more weeks. Let's really, really push for it. And just make the most of the next couple of weeks. All right. Talk to you later. See you then. Bye-bye.